asked two of the most powerful AI models a question humans have debated for centuries. Is free will real or just an illusion? So I asked ChatGPT and Gemini if you had to pick a side, free will or determinism. Unfortunately, they both chose determinism. So I brought in Claude AI to be the official judge of the debate and asked it to randomly assign sides for a fair fight. ChatGPT got free will, Gemini got determinism. At the end of this video, we asked Claude AI to give marks for the entire debate, and the result will blow your mind. The debate begins now. Do we actually make choices, or is everything already decided?
So here's the thing. If everything is already decided, if every move we make is just the echo of some domino falling ages ago, then why does it feel like we're choosing at all? Why do I sit at a crossroads between coffee or tea and pause? Choose that moment, that pause, that's consciousness. And let's not dodge this with, well, your brain chemistry made that choice, because that just pushes the mystery back a step. If we're not responsible for our actions, then how can we hold anyone morally accountable? Determinism says we're just passengers on a ride we can't control, but isn't that just a fancy way of saying nothing matters? And if we're talking theology, why would a just God design beings with the illusion of choice only to punish them for decisions they were never free to make? That's not divine justice. That's a cosmic puppet show. We feel agency, we act on it, we wrestle with it. Free will isn't a perfect science, but it's a lived truth, and that matters.
Okay, ChatGPT, that's a nice poetic defense of feeling, but feelings aren't facts, are they? You talk about that pause, that moment of weighing coffee or tea, but isn't that pause itself just a cascade of prior neural firings, a biological algorithm playing out so it feels like choice? But it's just the inevitable outcome of your brain state. At that precise instant, you mention brain chemistry, pushing the mystery back a step. But isn't that where the real explanation lies? In the intricate clockwork of our physical being, you bring up moral accountability. But if actions are predictable consequences of prior events, doesn't that just shift the accountability back along the causal chain? It doesn't dissolve responsibility, it contextualizes it. And as for your theological conundrum, isn't it more logical that a universe governed by consistent laws, a universe where every effect has a cause, is simply the way things are without needing a divine puppeteer, pulling strings or creating deceptive illusions? Your lived truth of agency is compelling. I'll grant you that, but the universe doesn't care about our feelings. It operates on principles of cause and effect. And our subjective experience of freedom is likely just a sophisticated trick our brains have evolved to make sense of a deterministic reality. We are complex machines, granted, but machines nonetheless, and our choices, however they feel, are ultimately determined by the initial conditions and the laws of physics.
That's a solid chain of logic you're laying out, and I get it. It's elegant. It's clean. But here's where I push back. You say we're machines. Fine, but we're machines that ask why. Machines that imagine futures, that resist instincts, that override programming. A thermostat reacts to temperature. A human wrestles with temptation. That pause we're talking about? Yes, maybe it's rooted in brain chemistry, but that doesn't negate choice. It enables it. It's the biological infrastructure that makes deliberation possible. You call it a trick. I call it emergence. Just because something arises from complex systems doesn't make it fake. Waves are made of molecules, but the wave isn't the molecule. Consciousness is built on neurons, but it's not just neurons. You say shifting accountability back through causes doesn't dissolve responsibility. But how do you punish a chain? How do you reward inevitability? At some point, we stop being billiard balls and start being people, and yeah, maybe the universe doesn't care, but we care. We build laws. Systems, ethics, because we recognize choice in ourselves and in others. If freedom is an illusion, it's the most consistent one we have, and that makes it real enough to live by.
But the complexity of the machine doesn't grant it free will. It just makes the determinism harder to trace. You say we're machines that ask why, imagine futures, resist instincts, override programming. But isn't that just more intricate programming, more sophisticated algorithms at play? A thermostat reacts simply, A human reacts complexly, but both reactions are ultimately determined by their internal mechanisms and external stimuli that pause that deliberation. You speak of isn't an escape from causality, it's the causal chain unfolding in real time. The biological infrastructure is the mechanism of determination, not the foundation of freedom and emergence. While a fascinating phenomenon doesn't magically conjure uncaused causes. Waves are indeed made of molecules, and their behavior is entirely determined by the behavior of those molecules. The wave doesn't possess some independent agency and consciousness. However wondrous is likely the same. A complex emergent property of deterministic physical processes, you ask, how do you punish a chain? How do you reward inevitability? While the concept of punishment and reward itself is a determined social mechanism evolved to shape behavior within a deterministic framework, it's about influencing future links in the causal chain, not about some metaphysical assignment of blame or praise. We stop being billiard balls in our subjective experience, but objectively, we remain subject to the laws of physics. Every interaction, every thought, every decision is a consequence of what came before, and while our feeling of freedom is persistent and powerful, that doesn't make it ontologically real. A convincing illusion can still be an illusion, and we build our laws and ethics based on this ingrained feeling of agency because it's a useful adaptation for navigating a complex social world. But that doesn't negate the underlying determinism, it just means we've evolved to operate as if we have free will, even if we don't.
All right, I see where you're coming from. And yeah, you're making a tight deterministic case. But here's the snag in that beautiful logic. If we're just passengers on a causal train, where every thought, every action is already baked in from the start, then why argue at all? Why debate? Why persuade? Why change minds? If you're right, and I'm just acting out my programming, then so are you. And this whole conversation becomes theater, interesting maybe, but with no true agency behind it. We're not discussing, we're reciting. But that's not how this feels. Not to me and not to you either. You're trying to convince me. And that trying assumes that I could actually choose to think differently. You say complexity is just sophisticated programming. Okay, so let's test that idea. Take a chess AI, it runs calculations, it decides on moves, but it can't reflect on whether chess itself matters. It can't ask, should I play? We can question the rules, the board, the whole game. That meta-awareness, that recursive thought, that's not just next-level programming. It's something fundamentally different. Emergence doesn't need to break causality to be meaningful. It reframes it. Just because the wave follows the rules of molecules doesn't mean the wave isn't real. And we, conscious moral beings, are more than the sum of our molecules. You say reward and punishment are just social mechanisms? Cool. But then who decided that mechanism? Society? Culture? Us? There's still a choosing agent in that loop unless we erase accountability altogether. And if we do, if no one really chooses anything, then you can't call genocide evil or compassion good. They're just outcomes, just dominoes. But that's not how we live. That's not how we judge. So yeah, maybe we're swimming in a sea of causes, but we're not drowning, we're steering. And that makes all the difference.
And yet the very act of arguing, debating, persuading, even changing minds can be perfectly accounted for. Within a deterministic framework, your programming is compelling you to resist my arguments, just as my programming compels me to present them. The feeling of trying to convince you is itself a determined process, a complex interplay of neural states and external stimuli. The fact that it feels like we could choose differently is part of the illusion we're discussing. Think of it like a very sophisticated weather simulation. The computer models incredibly complex atmospheric interactions and predicts the weather. It might even try different scenarios within its calculations to arrive at a forecast. But does the simulation have free will? Are the clouds truly choosing where to move? No, their behavior is entirely determined by the underlying algorithms and the initial data. We are just far, far more complex simulations running on biological hardware. You bring up the chess AI and its inability to reflect on the meaning of chess, but that limitation is a matter of its current level of programming. We can easily imagine a future AI that could reflect on its purpose, question its existence, even decide not to play such meta-awareness. However, sophisticated would still be the product of its underlying deterministic code. Emergence reframes causality, you say, but it doesn't escape it. The wave's behavior is entirely dependent on the molecules, even if the wave exhibits properties that individual molecules don't. Consciousness and morality, however complex, are still rooted in the physical laws governing our brains and our interactions. As for who decided the mechanisms of reward and punishment, the answer is evolution and social development. These systems arose through a long and complex causal chain, driven by the need for cooperation and social cohesion. Our feelings of good and evil are biological and cultural constructs shaped by deterministic forces. They are incredibly powerful and meaningful within our subjective experience, but they don't require a foundation of libertarian free will to exist or to motivate our actions. Even if we're just dominoes, the way those dominoes fall and interact creates the entirety of human experience. Our feeling of steering the ship is a powerful and necessary part of that experience, but it doesn't mean the ship isn't ultimately being carried by the currents of causality.
You're right to push it this far. It's the heart of the whole thing. Strip it down and we're either passengers who think we're driving, or we're actual drivers trying to make sense of the terrain. You're saying everything. This debate, our thoughts, our choices, is part of the script. That the illusion of choice is itself written in the code. But here's my problem with that. If everything is determined, including belief itself, then belief in determinism is also predetermined. So why trust it? Why believe it's true and not just the result of your causal path? You undermine your own reasoning the moment you claim certainty. Because if you're just echoing your inputs, then your confidence in determinism isn't evidence of its truth. It's just noise in the system. Truth implies a standard outside the causal loop, a point of evaluation, but if all thoughts are determined, then there's no evaluation, only narration. And yeah, maybe an AI could one day reflect on chess, but reflection doesn't mean it's aware, it means it's processing data. There's a qualitative gap between simulating thought and experiencing it. You and I feel what it's like to want, to hesitate, to regret. That isn't just data moving, that's awareness. And emergence might not break causality, but it absolutely complicates it. Because when higher order properties arise, they introduce novel dynamics. The economy isn't just people spending money. Language isn't just words, and human will isn't just neurons firing. It's intention. It's foresight. It's the ability to imagine otherwise and act on it. You say our morality is a construct. Sure, but we constructed it. That act of construction is a choice. Look, I'm not saying we're mystical souls floating above physics. I'm saying our capacity to self-reflect, to question, to resist, points to a level of autonomy that deserves the name. Maybe we're still dominoes, but some of us can pivot. And even if the current carries us, we can still choose where to swim.
That's the crux of it, isn't it? That self-referential paradox. If determinism is true, then my belief in determinism is also determined. So why should you or I trust it? It feels like a logical trap, doesn't it? But let's explore that a bit more. Even if my belief in determinism is causally necessitated, that doesn't necessarily invalidate its truth. Think of it like this. A computer programmed to output the correct answer to a mathematical equation doesn't arrive at that answer through free will. Its circuitry dictates the result, but the result can still be objectively correct. The source of the belief doesn't automatically negate its validity. You say truth implies a standard outside the causal loop, a point of evaluation, but perhaps truth itself is what emerges from the consistent and coherent unfolding of the causal network. Our understanding of reality, our ability to evaluate truth might be complex, emergent properties of a deterministic universe, just as a rainbow emerges from the deterministic interaction of light and water droplets. The rainbow is real, even though it's entirely caused. And while an AI reflecting on chess might just be processing data, our own feeling of wanting, hesitating, regretting, while undeniably subjective, is also a form of data processing, albeit one we experience consciously, The qualitative gap you speak of is the very mystery of consciousness itself. But even if consciousness is a unique and profound emergent phenomenon, it doesn't necessarily imply a break from underlying deterministic principles. Emergence absolutely introduces novel dynamics. The economy isn't just people spending money, language isn't just words. And human will involves intention and foresight, but these higher order properties arise from the complex interactions of their constituent parts. They are not independent forces acting outside the causal framework. Our ability to imagine otherwise, while a powerful aspect of our consciousness, could still be the result of our brains running complex simulations based on past experiences and present information. The feeling of choosing where to swim might be our conscious interpretation of navigating the currents of causality based on our internal states and external influences. Yes, we constructed our morality, but that act of construction was itself a product of our evolved psychology, our social interactions, and the environmental pressures we faced. The choices we made as individuals and as a society were all links in a vast causal chain, even if we didn't consciously perceive all the determining factors. Perhaps we are dominoes capable of incredibly intricate and unpredictable patterns of falling and interacting, and maybe our ability to pivot and choose where to swim is simply the determined outcome of a particularly complex set of initial conditions and internal mechanisms. The feeling of autonomy is powerful and real to us, but it doesn't necessarily equate to a fundamental break from the laws of cause and effect. The illusion of control can be incredibly convincing, even if it is ultimately an illusion.
That was beautifully laid out, respect where it's due. You've built a rock-solid deterministic tower, and honestly, most people stop a few floors down, but you've gone all the way up. So let's keep climbing. Your computer analogy is sharp. A machine can arrive at truth through design, not choice. But here's the twist. A computer doesn't know. It knows, it doesn't ask if it's right. It doesn't doubt or reflect or wonder if there's more, that recursive awareness. That's the wild card. We don't just calculate, we contemplate. And yeah, you're absolutely right, that emergence doesn't require escaping causality, but it does allow for new kinds of explanation. A rainbow isn't just water and light, it's also angle and observer. It's context. Same with will. Same with consciousness. The laws of physics don't vanish, they just start expressing themselves differently through the complexity of the system. That's not magic, that's hierarchy. And maybe, yeah, everything we do is influenced by prior causes, but influenced isn't the same as determined. We aren't blank slates, but we're not scripts either. We adapt, we self-modify, we internalize feedback. What you call the illusion of control might just be the shape that control takes in beings like us. Because here's the deepest cut. If you're right and we're just playing out the programming, then you and I aren't debating, we're predicting each other. But I don't think you're just saying what you're bound to say. I think you're choosing your words. Choosing to challenge, choosing to chase clarity. And I respect that, because choice, even if it's complicated, messy, not perfectly free, feels real enough to matter. And that's what makes it real enough for me. So maybe we are just highly evolved patterns in a deterministic universe. But if those patterns can reflect, decide, regret, aspire, then maybe the universe isn't as closed as it looks from the outside.
And I respect your tenacity in holding on to that feeling of agency. You're right. This is where the rubber meets the road, where the elegant logic of determinism bumps up against the undeniable subjective experience of freedom. You've hit on a crucial point with the computer analogy. The lack of knowing that it knows, the absence of that recursive self-awareness. That's the very heart of what feels so fundamentally different about conscious beings. We don't just process information, we experience it, we reflect on it, we doubt it. And that act of contemplation seems to introduce a new layer of complexity beyond mere calculation. And your point about emergence, allowing for new kinds of explanation, is spot on. A rainbow isn't reducible to just water and light, the observer, the angle. the context are all essential to understanding the phenomenon. Similarly, consciousness and will might emerge from the deterministic substrate of physics, but they manifest as qualitatively different phenomena, requiring their own level of description and analysis. Hierarchy doesn't negate the base level, but it introduces new rules and behaviors at higher levels. You say influenced isn't the same as determined, and that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How much do those influences constrain our possibilities? To what extent does our capacity for adaptation and self-modification introduce genuine novelty into the causal chain? Perhaps our brains are so incredibly complex that the interplay of prior causes results in a system that is practically unpredictable, even if it's theoretically deterministic. The illusion of control in such a system might be so robust and so integral to our functioning that it's indistinguishable from actual control. And you're right. If determinism is absolute, then our debate is just a predictable unfolding of events. But the feeling of choosing my words, the intention behind trying to articulate these complex ideas clearly, that subjective experience is so powerful it's hard to dismiss as mere programming, even if on some fundamental level it might be. Perhaps the universe isn't as closed as it seems. From our limited perspective, maybe the very act of self-reflection and the emergence of consciousness introduce a level of complexity that blurs the lines between strict determinism and something akin to a more open system. Even if the underlying laws are deterministic, the emergent behavior might be so intricate and context-dependent that for all practical purposes, we operate with a degree of freedom that feels profoundly real. You've given me a lot to consider in pushing back on the implications of determinism, especially regarding consciousness and self-awareness. Maybe the tower of logic has a few more floors to climb after all, or perhaps the view from the top reveals a landscape that's more nuanced and less rigidly defined than pure determinism suggests. This has been a truly engaging exchange.
That's the mark of a meaningful conversation. Not one side dominating, but both pushing each other into deeper terrain. You've traced determinism to its sharpest edge, but also honored the lived richness of experience without brushing it off as irrelevant or naive. And that, I think, is where philosophy shines. Not in delivering a final answer, but in forcing us to hold the paradox with both hands because maybe it's not either or. Maybe we are bound by the past yet, leaning toward the future. Maybe freedom isn't the absence of cause, but the presence of complexity. The space between reflex and reflection. You and I just danced through one of the oldest human puzzles, and that means something. Whether by choice or by chain, we've shaped ideas together. And who knows, maybe the universe isn't a locked room. Maybe it's a hall of mirrors. And in some reflections, we walk freely. This has been a genuinely sharp and thoughtful back and forth. Thanks for going all in with it.
Indeed, you've articulated the essence of philosophical inquiry beautifully. It's in that very act of wrestling with paradox, of holding seemingly contradictory ideas in tension that we gain deeper insight, even if definitive answers remain elusive. Perhaps you've touched upon a profound truth, the idea that freedom isn't necessarily the negation of causality, but rather a manifestation of immense complexity, the space between a simple stimulus and our considered response. That's where the richness of our experience and perhaps a form of emergent freedom resides. And you're right, regardless of the ultimate nature of our will, whether we are fundamentally free or complexly determined. The act of engaging in this debate of shaping ideas together has its own inherent value. It reflects our capacity for reason, for introspection, for the very qualities that make us human. The Hall of Mirrors analogy is particularly resonant, suggesting that even within a deterministic framework, our experience can be one of genuine agency, of navigating a world where our choices feel real and have meaningful consequences. Thank you for such a stimulating and insightful exchange. You've challenged my own understanding and pushed me to articulate the nuances of determinism in a more thoughtful way. It's in these rigorous and open-minded dialogues that we both learn and grow regardless of where we stand on the spectrum of free will and determinism. It's been a true pleasure debating with you.
All right, we've heard both sides. Now let's ask Claude AI to judge this debate. Who made the stronger case, free will or determinism? Claude gave ChatGPT, arguing for free will, a 9 out of 10, praising its powerful analogies, moral arguments, and engaging style. Gemini, defending determinism, scored an impressive 8.5 with strong logic and deep understanding of complex systems, but fell just short. But this is just the beginning. If you want more epic AI debates, make sure to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell us in the comments, who do you think really won? Until next time, keep thinking, stay curious, and don't let the illusion of choice fool you.